facilitate the students, this subject allocation and timetable committee of Law Center 1 is organizing this orientation program under the guidance of Professor Dr. Sarabjit Kaur, Professor in charge of Law Center 1. And I am sure that you all are going to be immensely benefited by the information given by the subject experts here. So with this, I call upon Dr. Anil Sen for his welcome address. Over to you, sir. Sir, you are not audible. Sir, you are not audible. Anil sir, you are not audible. No, sir.
So please check your volume, sir.
Very good afternoon to all of you. Hope that problem is corrected. Am I audible, everyone?
Yes, yes, sir. You are audible now.
Yeah. Let me welcome dear students and esteemed professors. Let me take this opportunity to thank everyone, and I welcome everyone for this orientation program for the overview of optional subjects for the semester 4th and 6th. When I begin, in my view, the orientation this particular program will ensure a clarity on the options that the students can choose wisely for the better career prospect in the field of law. The orientation program will allow the students to exercise the option of changing the preferences which they have already filled in the admission form if they desire to do so. In this regard, I shall welcome all the subject experts who shall be drawing the clarity on the optional subjects. And let me also apprise that the students of the 4th semester are required to opt for 2 optional subjects out of the 7 available options. The students of 6th semester are required to opt for 1 optional subject out of 4 available options. Also important to note over here, in case the minimum number of the students do not opt for an optional subject, that preference is dropped as an option. And one such subject which has been observed in the past years happens to be law of carriage, which by students is not preferred for over a period of time. And important for this one, it is to be noted that the important dates for giving the optional subject is Thursday, December 17th, 2020 by 11:59 p.m. The links and the audio video recording shall be available on LC1 official YouTube channel, and the links are available and notified on the LC1 official website. With this one and not taking much time, let me thank everyone for your attention, and I wish all the best to the students and a lot of success. Thank you, Dr. Anju.
Thank you so much, Dr. Anil, for enlightening us and giving relevant information about the optional subject. And now I request Professor Dr. Ved Kumari to give an overview of regarding that optional subject of 4th semester, that is gender justice and feminist jurisprudence. Over to you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this orientation. I'm going to start and end my information about gender justice course saying that if you don't opt for this course, you will go out of the law faculty uneducated in the current discussions on issues which are very relevant in the court proceedings. As the name suggests, gender justice, a lot of people think that it is about discrimination against women, but that's not so. It's not limited to. Certainly it is, half of the course is focused on women discrimination. But gender today includes the third as well, the other, the human beings which are not classified either as male or female. In our first class, we usually ask the question, do you know what is the difference between sex and gender? And the simplistic explanation comes in saying sex is biological differentiation and gender is the sociological upbringing. But that's a very, very base level of understanding of gender justice. We are going to examine in this course the understanding that the sex itself is gendered. The biological body of male and female and the other are in a hierarchical relationship. There's no laws which have been made. Now we are beginning to make laws, but so far the inheritance law, for example, does not take cognizance of the body which is neither male nor female. But the property devolves to wives, devolves to sons and daughters, but children who are born intersex, what about their family, their rights of inheritance to their parents' property? The law doesn't recognize that they exist. This is a very blatant example of how the body itself is gendered. Which body we take cognizance of, which is the body of human being. Because human bodies have traditionally been saying binary of male and female. Today, in law also we recognize there is a third kind of body as well. But the law take cognizance of the male body as the standard of a human body and makes laws. So there are lots of nuances to the understanding of gender in this course, which you will get exposed to. And I think this understanding of gender is essential to today's practice. You cannot go to the court of law and argue a rape matter or a family law matter or adoption matter without having an understanding of what is the gender dimensions of the laws. Gender neutral laws like murder, whoever with the intention to cause death causes death, is gender neutral, applies to whether a man commits offense or whether the woman commits the offense of murder. But when you examine this law from the gender lens, you realize that there are so many gender angles to lots of all the laws which are gender neutral have itself gender connotations. The laws which are considered as gendered only for benefit of women, for example, the pregnancy law, the pregnancy leave, the maternity leave, whether it is a gendered law for women or it is a human rights law made for human beings. So there are lots of nuances and critical insights that you will get in this course. I can very briefly tell you that there are 8 topics in this course. The first one is, of course, the introduction. What is gender? Notions of sex and gender, deconstructing man, woman, and other, and private-public dichotomy. Then we go and look at the concept of patriarchy and feminist jurisprudence. So some schools of feminist jurisprudence, and this understanding of feminist critique of the law is very useful to analyze the legal impact for any deprived group, whether they be Dalits, whether they be whatever is the other, whether these are poor, whether these are minority, religious minority, any other minority. You can use the same analytical tools which this course provides to you. We have topic 3 as LGBTQH++. So you will know that there are a lot of nuances. We are usually aware of the short form LGBT, but is there a difference between lesbian and homosexual and gay and homosexual? There are lots of nuances again, which we will get exposed to in this course. We also look at the international instruments on gender justice, starting with UDHR to the CEDAW and Yogyakarta principles and all. Then we have topic 5, sexuality and morality in law, that how does the law, the criminal law area, takes cognizance of now how gendered the laws are. Rape law, certainly we know that it is only an offense by a man against a woman. But what happened to the third? When they are the rapists or when they are the raped one, which law will apply? So there are lots of, we take up some legislations in this one, a couple of offenses from IPC, and then we take at Immoral Traffic Prevention Act and Indecent Representation of Women's Act. We look at a couple of cases as well in this one. Then we have topic 6, economic empowerment in law. And it looks at labor laws, which are the gender protective law, gender neutral laws, and gender corrective laws. We have got some cases also listed in this case. Topic 7 is reproductive rights, in which we look at IPC provisions relating to abortion and motherhood, abandonment, etc. Then we look at Medical Termination of Pregnancy Act, Maternity Benefit Act, and the PC and PMDT Act. The last topic is law protecting women against violence at home, which is the domestic violence arena. So these are the broad 8 topics that we cover. And certainly I found year after year, I've been teaching this course for a few years. And every year students go back and say, Madam, why is this course not a compulsory course? And it should be actually compulsory. But certainly that the way we have the policies of UGC and Bar Council, this scheme is saying it's an optional course. But I certainly think it should be compulsorily read by every single LLB student before you pass out. We had mock trials and students were still taking pleas like, if the mother is working, she cannot look after children and therefore the custody should be given to fathers. I said, shame on us if our students, final year students are still arguing in this manner in a mock trial. Certainly you need to understand that every single nuance of law has a critical perspective. And most of our courses are not taught from the critical perspective. So it will give you a tool in your hands as a lawyer, as a human being, to critically examine and not accept what I call as the hierarchical and hereditary knowledge, which has been passed on to us from generation to generation without critiquing it. So I certainly think that you all must opt, all the 4th semester must opt for this course. It's an absolute must before you pass out LLB. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me at this point of time. Any of the students have any question? I think the system allows you to unmute yourself and ask a question. Pragya has raised her hand. Yes, Pragya.
Ma'am, we have already chosen our optionals.
Yeah. Yeah, and Dr. Anil Sen did mention that you can have the option of changing your courses if you want to till 17th. Did you say, Anil?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, till
17th. If you want to change your option, you can do so by 17th.
Okay,
But
thank
after
you,
that, no changes. After that, no changes permitted.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Yes, thank you so much, ma'am, for the excellent information. And I'm sure that students are going to opt gender justice as optional subject. And it's always a pleasure to hear you, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
My pleasure.
Okay. Now I call upon Dr. Gurpreet Singh to share his views on international institutions. Over to Gurpreet Singh, sir, please. Gurpreet Singh, sir. I think there is some technical problem with Dr. Gurpreet Singh, sir. So I'm calling the next presenter. Yes, Dr. Gurpreet
You can just ask him to unmute. He has not unmuted himself.
No, he's not. Dr. Gurpreet Singh, please unmute yourself.
Okay, now I'm audible.
Ma'am, I think it is because of the large number.
I have already
yes,
done so,
Gurpreet
madam.
Singh, sir, you are audible. Yes, sir.
My call is okay.
Sir, over to you,
Audible
sir.
now. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
And thank you very much. Thank you very much to give me a chance to introduce a subject, the law of international institution. And just wait a minute. Let me share a slide with you. Okay, my slides are visible.
No, sir, it's not. Sir, it's not visible.
Not visible?
No, sir.
Okay, let me start. If my sound is My sound is coming. I have already shared. I don't
Yes,
know
sir.
what is the technical problem.
Yes.
But if my sound
Sir.
is coming, let me introduce the subject to all of you.
Yes, sir, you are audible.
And okay, audible. Fine. Thank you. Law of international institutions. Again, it is an optional subject in your fourth semester, and this is one of the most important subjects, and something you might have already read when you have already gone through the public
Sir, yeah,
international
now,
law,
sorry
which
to
is your
interrupt you,
compulsory
sir.
subject.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir. Now your slide is also visible.
Okay, thank you very much. So that's introductions. And what I am saying that you might have already gone through the public international law, which is the compulsory subject, and purpose behind going through public international law is to introduce some parts of the international law, so that everybody should be aware of what is the international law, what does it mean by international law, what is the nature of the international law, and purpose behind introducing the law of international institution is if you want to go in more detail in some particular area where you are going to deal with these international institutional organizations, then you can opt this subject. And what is the necessity why we have introduced this subject? And if you know, and you might be aware of that Westphalian Peace Treaty of 1648, it was the beginning of new international law. And in this century, many commissions took place. They tried to resolve the various differences among the member nations. Some of the examples of commissions I have given here: the Rhine Commissions of 1815, European River Commissions on the different rivers like the Elbe 1821, Douro 1835, 1849, Dunbe 1856. What these they reflect? They reflect that the interactions among the states has begun, particularly with the age of the Industrial Revolutions. And when the interactions among the states began, it also resulted into various kinds of conflicts, particularly conflicts regarding the issue of navigations. So in order to resolve all the differences, these states at a different point of time, they constituted the various commissions. So some of the examples which I have already given to you. But with the passage of time, it was felt that there is need for the permanent institution or permanent organization which well engaged with each other and which would discuss the various issues and problems at the same time. So it was the beginning of the making of the international institutional organizations, and some of the examples which I have already given to you, like Metric Union of 1875, International Copyright Union of 1886, then International Sugar Unions of 1902, Office of Public Health 1903, and later on you know that the World Health Organizations. These all institutions, they came into existence in the 18th and the beginning of the 19th century, and the reason behind it is to solve the conflict among the states. So the background of these institutions would clearly convey you the idea that why and what is the necessity of these international organizations. So another important aspect is when we talk about the international organizations, what does it mean by them? इनका क्या meaning होता है? How you can define the international organization? So I'm not going in so many definitions, just to give you the hint what do you mean by international organizations. Just one definition that is given by the International Law Commission. It says,
लगता है डिस्कनेक्ट हो गए हो.
Yes, he has been disconnected. So let's wait for 1 minute, and otherwise I'll continue with the next speaker.
There is some message that जरा अंजू.
हाँ मैम करके देखते हैं. I'm trying to contact him.
नहीं, किसी का मैसेज है अभी, भास्कर भारती. Would you restart the meeting through institutional ID such that more students could join? Some are unable to join.
Ma'am, I'll ask my technical colleague who is looking after this. I'll
Actually,
just
initiated this thing using the institutional ID only. Maybe I'll just message it on the chat box.
you please message it. I think there is some technical problem, Gurpreet sir.
The second message said it's limited to only 100 people.
Shachi is try for that. Shachi is looking into that.
Mhm.
It can exceed beyond 100.
But in any case, the video will be available. So
Yes,
those who
yes,
can't
yes.
join, those who can't see it now, they can look at it later.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It will be available on the LC1 website as well as on the YouTube also.
Ah.
So, because of the technical problem with Gurpreet sir, now I call upon Dr. Surinder Mehra sir to give his views or information on competition law.
Thank you, ma'am.
Over to you, sir.
Am I audible, ma'am? Yes.
Yes, sir, very
Good
much.
afternoon, everybody. Today, guys, I have been asked like why you should choose this topic, competition law. Basically, what I want to tell you about the importance of this topic, because this word itself, the word competition itself is confusing sometimes. So first of all, let me clear the meaning of competition. Then we'll discuss even the scope as well as the importance of this competition law. Competition means more and more sale, more and more profit, more and more sale, more and more profit, and more patronage of the customer. This is the, if we define it in our language, so this is the meaning of competition. More and more patronage, more and more customer, more and more sale. So this kind of competition actually prevailing between the various level of market players, which includes even the national market players, local market players, and even international market players also. So far as the Competition Act 2002 is concerned, if you read the preamble of this Competition Act 2002, then you will come to know there are four objects. There are four objects of this Competition Act. The first one is to prevent practices having adverse effect on competition. To prevent practices having adverse effect on competition, like anti-competitive practices, Section 3, abuse of dominance, merger and amalgamation. Basically, we are concerned with the appreciable adverse effect of all these practices. The second objective, as per preamble of this Constitution, preamble of this Competition Act 2002. Second one is to promote and sustain competition in market. Promote and sustain competition in market. And third one is to protect the interest of consumer. It means consumer is also one of the object. And fourth one is, to ensure the freedom of trade carried on by different market players. Like I told you, national and international market players. So basically, why this subject is important, I mean to say, apart from these four objectives, what we have to achieve through this Competition Act 2002, because this particular act, this particular law, competition law, is directly putting effect on your pocket. How different level of market players, national and international market players, how they are looting us. I'm using this harsh word, how they are looting us, because there are four kind of market in our market. There are four kinds of market, like perfect competition, perfect market, monopoly, monopolistic, and monopolistic. So I'll give the examples of also how we can achieve these four objectives. What I told you about as per the preamble of this Competition Act 2002. This, because, and apart from it, how this is related with your pocket, this is directly related with the economic efficiency of our country also. Economic efficiency. If we are not economically efficient, then the word social justice, political justice, what you read in Constitution of India, as per preamble, even in preamble of our Constitution,
social justice and political justice. This is also, these are also meaningless without achieving the goal of economic efficiency. So this is how you can understand the importance of this subject, Competition Act or competition law. What my point? So basically, we are concerned with the economic efficiency. So with this, I'll share you very interesting two cases in very brief. I mean, brief. Like first case is FICCI Multiplex Association versus United Producer and Distributor. You can come to know how these different, various level of market players, how they are looting us, in almost all sector, not only in this particular sector, I mean, in this movie sector or this multiplex sector, in almost all sector, grocery items or, technology sector or almost every sector, this kind of anti-competitive practices are prevailing there. The first case is FICCI Multiplex Association versus United Producer and Distributor. In this case, what happened, guys? In brief, this United Producer and Distributors, they decided together, in which you can, I mean, the big A grade movie producer and distributor, to whom, I mean, in which you can include even the name of Amir Khan, Salman Khan, as well as this Karan Johar and all those A grade movie producers. They decided together that they'll not release movies, A grade movies, to multiplexes unless and until they get a big amount of revenue from the multiplexes. So ultimately, what is the impact? You can come to know the multiplex owners, they are compelled to raise they are compelled to increase the price of their, price of ticket, price of movie ticket. So this is directly putting effect. So finally, Competition Commission of India decided that yes, this is anti-competitive practice, and these producers, they cannot do this thing. They cannot withhold the production or as well as the releasing of these A-grade movies. Second case is Belair Owners Association versus DLF. In this case, what happened? Basically the complainants were apartment allottees. So they deposited, a big amount of, advance money to the DLF, like in order to get the possession of these apartments. So the main concern, because they signed this particular standard form contract, in which this is one-sided contract, standard form contract. So first of all, when they deposited this amount, after that the DLF decided that now they'll construct, instead of 28 floors, now they'll construct 29 floors. So this will delay the possession of apartment also. So Competition Commission of India in this case also decided that this is also against anti-competitive practices, or this is abuse of dominance, Section 4 of your Competition Act. So with these two cases, I mean to say how these market players, sometime in the name of monopoly, or sometime in the name of oligopolistic practice, sometime in the name of monopolistic practice, if you come to know, because this subject is related with your economics also. If you have economic background, then this would be the best choice if you read, because without read or without understanding the nature of market, I don't think so we can survive, because ultimately we are moving around our, we are moving here and there just for our economic efficiency. So with these two case law, we can come to know what kind of practices are there, what kind of anti-competitive practices are there. Apart from it, I'll tell you, there are, three kind of efficiency: allocative efficiency, productive efficiency, and dynamic efficiency. Allocative efficiency means, because we have a developing country, so allocative efficiency means produce more and more as per the demand of the society, as per the demand of the population. And productive efficiency, produce at the lowest cost. And dynamic efficiency, more and more innovation, technological development. So collectively, you can call it economic efficiency, or consumer welfare, or total welfare, or overall welfare. So guys, if you do not, if we do not achieve these things, allocative, productive, and dynamic efficiency, we cannot achieve our economic efficiency. What is the ultimate goal of our, our country, basically? Because through this, we can reach up to the stage of development economy, because what we want to achieve, we are, without just by saying this and that, what we are doing this and that, this is not enough. Ultimate, the object, that is economic efficiency, achieving the goal of economic efficiency, and which we can achieve only through this. And for that, there is only one market, that is perfect competition. And the example of perfect competition is vegetable market, where you can grow, where you can purchase any kind of vegetable at the lowest cost. So this is the ultimate goal what we want to achieve. So in this subject, in competition law, we have to study basically how we can achieve. This will show you the entire picture of market, how we can achieve economic efficiency, how we can become a developed nation also. We can achieve the status of developed economy also. So with this, and so far as the scope of this, competition law is concerned, or Competition Act, competition law is concerned, like we have a Competition Commission of India. Now you can see, apart from, your civil and criminal law practice, there is a scope in this area also. You can practice this law. So this will give you the, a good base of society, a good base of market. And now the syllabus, but we have to study in our course material. In topic number 1, we'll study basically the constitutional aspect, like Article 39 A and B, B and C, Article 39 B and C clause of our constitution. We'll study in that. This is the base of this competition law, the basic concept basically, as well as the objective of competition law. In topic 2, we'll study the history and development of competition law, like basically like what is the contribution of Raghavan committee, what is the contribution of different other committees, and how this is related with LPG regime, liberalization, privatization, and globalization after post 1990s reforms, how this is related with that. In topic number 3, we'll discuss the different anti-competitive practice like horizontal agreement, vertical agreement. So with this, we'll study, basically with the help of this case law, this section 3, anti-competitive practices. Section 4 will discuss, abuse of dominant position, like how, the dominance is not bad, how the abuse of dominance is bad, and how these big market players, international market players or national market players, big fish, how they are enjoying, how they are abusing the dominance, the market size. If they have a good size, good market size, or the maximum number of consumers are dependent on that, so they become dominant one. So dominance is not bad, abuse of dominance. In unit 5, we'll discuss the regulation of combination, section 5 and 6 basically, like merger and amalgamation, and the appreciable adverse effect of this merger and amalgamation, how the Competition Commission of India is approving even the combination also right now, just after keeping giving a full full observation towards the notices what different big different market players are giving to the Competition Commission of India. And in topic 6, we'll discuss the powers and all jurisdiction and functions of Competition Commission of India. In topic 7, we'll discuss competition advocacy. Competition advocacy means like create a culture of competition. Like through this competition advocacy, section 49 of Competition Act will discuss what to do and what not to do. So you can work with even the trade unions also, you can work for the different financial institutions also, because so far as the Indian industry, the nature or the picture of Indian industry is concerned, our entrepreneurs or our businessmen, they are not well versed with this law, because this is a new law even for the lawyers also. They are also going through and just practicing this one. So you can come to know, you can tell them, okay, these are the things what you can do and what you cannot do. Especially for industrialists or entrepreneurs and businessmen. In topic 8, we'll discuss the relationship or the interface between intellectual property right and competition law, because this is also a very a sensational topic, like which one is better, in this intellectual property right is good or this competition law is good. So in topic 8, we'll discuss the interface between intellectual property right and competition law. So in last, I say, guys, if you read this competition law, then it will be really beneficial for you, and you can come to know the total overall picture of our society, overall picture of our market. And without knowing the nature of market, because think about the people who are below poverty line, think about the people, our population, think about the development of our country and economy. So if we are not aware about the current practices, anti-competitive practices, what is prevailing or what is running in society, in market, I mean to say, so we cannot, I think we cannot do justice with our study and with our society also. Thank you. If you have question about this competition law or this competition act, then you can ask me. Thank you, Anju ma'am.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing this very valuable information with the students, and I'm sure it's really going to help the students in choosing the subject. Now I'm calling upon Dr. Preeti Rana for the purpose of throwing light on legislative drafting. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. Good afternoon, respected faculty members and dear students. I'm here to brief you about the subject legislative drafting. As you know, I'm still, since I'm addressing third semester student, because you're going to opt this subject in fourth semester. So far, you must have read approximately 15, 20 bare acts in various subjects. So what have you been doing so far is that you've been interpreting bare acts, interpreting sections therein. But with this particular subject, you are going to see how statutes or how acts or how legislations are being drafted. So if you opt this subject, then you are going to put yourselves into the shoes of a draftsman, that how a draftsman takes all the pain to draft a particular legislation. Here, so far you must have seen that your bare act has short title, long title, definition clause. You will see that what is the purpose behind putting all these things. You will try to analyze the structure of a particular statute or a legislation. When we talk about legislative drafting, we are not just talking about drafting a legislation, we are talking about drafting everything which comes under this, bylaws, orders, etc. So you will actually see that what all it takes to draft a particular legislation. So you will all over you will get a different perspective that how a legislation is being drafted. So, and there is a saying that drafting is not done in isolation. It cannot be done in isolation, because while you draft a particular legislation, you need to look into so many factors. Social aspects comes into picture, that what is the need in the society, why a particular legislation is being required. Because what a draftsman does is he's actually trying to implement the policy of the legislature which has been given to him, that you need to materialize this policy into a particular legislation. So behind that policy, what was the need for that policy? What are the loopholes which that particular legislation has aimed for? So you will be analyzing what all it takes to draft a particular legislation. Let's say when PCPNDT Act came up in 1994, or let's say when in 2005 we had Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act. Why was the need for these particular acts at that point of time? Because the society was feeling a need to address these issues, and whatever the existing legislation was there, it was not sufficient to address the issue. So this particular aspect came up in the society as a need. So a policy was framed, and the task was assigned to the draftsman to draft a particular legislation to address these issues, or whatever the loopholes were there, or whatever things which were missing into there. So to address those issues into a draftsman. So while you will study this subject, you will have a totally different perspective what you have done so far. So far you have only interpreted bare acts. You haven't seen what section interpretation is there and all that. But in this particular subject, you will, instead of interpreting the sections or interpreting subsection or clauses, you will actually get into drafting. So this subject is basically about honing your drafting skills. So it requires a lot of discipline, it requires a lot of patience, because draftsman job is not easy, I would say. Because Professor Bakshi has used this phrase that so far there has been never a perfect draftsman, because no matter how hard you try, there will be some lacuna, some ambiguity in a particular legislation, no matter how the draftsman best he has tried. And that is why we have litigations and we have interpretation tools to help into that wherever there is ambiguity, we have interpretative tools, we have judiciary which comes for the rescue, because you must have heard, many times we have literal interpretation, many times we have wider interpretation. So these are the tools to clear upon those ambiguities. So this subject is all about drafting. You will see why a particular style has been chosen by the draftsman, what was the need to use certain phrases at that particular point of time, even small nitty-gritties like punctuation, that what was the demand or what was the need to put this punctuative mark here. Had it not been here, it would have given a totally different meaning to what he intended to. So what a particular draftsman is doing, he is carrying the intention of the legislature towards the society. Actually, a draftsman is like a middleman between the legislature and the audience to which he or she is catering to. So it is not an easy job to draft a particular legislation because so many things are at stake, and a minute even any minute discrepancy would lead to such a haywire things. So in all, in this subject, you will, if I talk about the unit-wise breakup of the subject, you will get to see that in the first unit, we will see what legislative scheme is, that how before drafting a legislation, how first a legislative scheme is being formulated, and then that legislative scheme is being handed over to the draftsman from where he continues further. Then in the first unit itself, you will further see that what is the structure of the act. When we talk about structure, we are talking about that the structure of the Bare Act. When you see that there is a preamble, what is the purpose of putting the preamble in the Bare Act, what is the purpose of putting the long title, short title, what is the purpose of definition clause, why, and even the chronology. You will see that the particular chronology is being followed and what is the reason behind that chronology, why that has been chosen. Then if you further move on to unit 2, you will see that we will be talking about the common phrases which are being used in the Bare Acts, which are used in different types of legislation or the acts, that why those particular phrases have been used. Then you will see that use of language. In that unit itself, you will see that what kind of language is being used by the draftsman. There's a particular style being followed by a draftsman, that you cannot simply use jargons, or you cannot simply use short abbreviations for any particular, because it is a formal text you're talking about. It cannot be in any type of language. You need to address it in a formal language, and that is why we will explore that what kind of terminologies, what kind of language, what kind of phrases are being used by a draftsman. Unit 3, therein it will give you a practical exposure wherein you actually will step into the shoes of the draftsman, and you will be drafting various types of legislation, wherein we'll put ourselves in a hypothetical situation and we'll say, let's say, let's draft this particular legislation to address this particular issue in the society. And fourth unit, therein we will be talking about the difficulties faced by a draftsman, that what are the barriers which a draftsman face many a times, because when we have given this job to a draftsman to draft a legislation, we cannot say that we have given him a free hand. There are many limitations within which he has to work on. So overall, it's a very beautiful subject. If you are looking for honing or developing your drafting skills, or if you aspire to be a future draftsman of the country, or anywhere else, this is the subject you are looking for. And well, that's it. If anyone of you, yes.
Ma'am, I'm third semester student. I want to know that do we have any casemate for this paper?
When you talk about case material, because we will not be referring to cases here, but we do have case material in the form of compilation. Yes, we have a full-fledged, very good material for the subject, wherein we have a compilation of various readings. So we do have case material, yes.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Ma'am, what kind of questions can we expect in the examination for this particular subject?
It's going to be because in Delhi University we have a practical based approach in all the papers. So here also you will find that some questions will be practical problem based questions wherein you will be drafting. You will be asked to draft particular legislation, and so it will be an amalgamation mix of problem based and certain theoretical types of questions. I can understand why these queries are coming, because you must have approached your seniors or your well-wishers, and students must have informed you that we do not have enough material on this or all those things. But I do assure you that we have a good amount of material on this, and we do have a case material also on this subject. Any other question?
I may perhaps clarify that in some of the courses, the materials are not on the website because of the copyright aspect of it. If these are only cases, then there is no copyright issue. But if there are readings, then putting it on the website makes it violative of the copyright issue. So the materials are given to those students who opt for the course directly into their email.
Thank you, ma'am, for clarifying that.
Thank you, Dr. for giving insight of this subject, and you have very well explained about the importance and limitations of the subject. So I hope it's going to help the students in choosing the subject. So thank you so very much.
Ma'am, one more thing. Can I just?
Yes.
I hope I have catered to the doubts of all the students, but still, if anyone has any doubt, you can contact me later on, and I would love to help you out. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Yes. Later on, if any student is still having any doubt regarding any of the subject, you are free to contact the subject experts.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Dr. T. So now Gurpreet sir is back, and I think you are having some connection issues. So if you are ready with your presentation and if your connection is fine, so we can we proceed with you, Dr. Gurpreet?
Yes, I'm audible now.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You are present.
My connection is clear now.
Yes.
So I don't know where I lost actually. So can you tell me what I was discussing, or I have discussed something or not yet?
Sir, you start with the introduction itself.
On introduction, okay, I'm not sharing the slides.
You are discussing introduction, so you start with that only.
Okay. So, thank you. So I started giving you the introduction of the international organizations. That is a options which is in your fourth semester. And what I am talking about, that was the necessity why we read the international organizations. So as I was talking about that Westphalian Treaty of 1648, that can be considered as the beginning of the modern international law, because this treaty has brought a lot of change, particularly the sovereignty. The sovereign issues among the states has become a very important kind of, very important kind of element among the states, and all the states, they started claiming the sovereignty, and they contemplate that no state would interfere in their internal matters. But as a dispute also arises among the states, because as the Westphalian Treaty came into existence in 1648, by which the 13 years of the war in the European was concluded by this treaty. But if you also see that this age was the age of the industrial revolutions, and the consequences of that industrial revolutions is that more interactions among the European states grew, and there were a lot of conflict and a lot of issues among them. For example, there was a conflict regarding the navigations. So at the time to time, the European states, they brought a lot of commissions in order to solve the navigations issue, and some of the things, navigations commissions which were constituted at the time was like the Rhine Commission of 1815, then Elbe Commission of 1821, Nuremberg Commission of 1856. These commissions were constituted in order to solve the navigation issues among these states. But need was felt that there are need to have a permanent kind of institutions which would look after the various kind of needs, various demands of the state day-to-day basis. Therefore, the efforts were also made, and in consequently, Metric Union 1875, International Copyright Union 1886, International Sugar Union 1902, these were the basic institutions which came into existence at the end of 18th and beginning of 19th century, before even the League of Nations. Then that's another important thing about the international institution is what does it mean by international institutions? Meaning क्या है international institution या international organizations? And just to tell you the brief idea about international institutions as defined by the International Law Commission is that International Law Commission says that international organizations are established by treaty or other instrument governed by the international law and possessing its own international legal personality. Whatever international organizations are, they are in the international arena is, they have their own treaties, they have their own instrument by which they came into existence. For example, you can take the example of United Nations. Then UN Charter is there, which makes the United Nations. In the same way, if you talk about the World Trade Organizations, then 1994, the GATT, which makes the WTO. These all instruments or treaties are there, which make the existence of these organizations. Then they are governed by the international law. The international law governs the interactions of these institutions. And once these institutions came into existence, they have its own separate legal personality. When we talk about that, they have their own separate legal personality, it has certain implications and meaning in international law. So, in simply, what are the international organizations? Basically, they are constituted by the state, but it doesn't mean the state are the only members of the international organization. Sometimes some other organizations are also member of the international organizations, but largely it is confined to the states. And once they came into existence, they are distinct and independent personality from the state. Example of there are two important examples of the international organization is the United Nations, which is still there from the 1945 onward, WTO 1994, European Union, if you talk about the regional institutions. Now, why we study the international organizations? Ultimately, in globalized world, when the conflict has arisen among the states, you need to solve them. You need some kind of permanent forum where the state could come together, they could discuss their problems, and they could try to find out the solution of these complex problems which these member states are facing in these days. Therefore, different institutions has come into existence, like you can take the example of ILO, European Union's World Health Organization, which is dealing with the pandemic currently. And there are so many institutions right now which are there at the international level, which we can't study the all. Only few we have chosen here. Then second important reason for studying the international organization, that these institutions do foster the cooperation among the members by conducting some kind of meeting. They provide some kind of common platform to discuss the solutions of the contemporary problems. They make the policies, they shape the international law. For example, if you talk about the WTO, World Trade Organizations, it talks about the policies and programs which the countries are going to have regarding the commerce and trade, that how these countries have the policies and program about the commerce and trade. For example, various multilateral treaties came into existence under the under these WTO organizations itself, like you can say multilateral treaty on the farmers, then intellectual properties, all those areas. So these institutions are offering a common platform to the states that they can come together and negotiate. So that's why we study the international organizations. Then what are the things which we are going to deal in your syllabus? Syllabus is totally different than the earlier syllabus. It was reshaped in last years, keeping in mind that to develop the critical faculties among the students. Therefore, now what we are going to deal in the topic 1 is the rise of international organizations. That is the historical aspect, that how this international organization evolved and what were the necessity behind these international organizations. So we touch in very briefly regarding the historical aspect of these international organizations. Then we go to the definitions. Of course, one definition I have already discussed, and when we will deal with the subject, we will discuss many more. Then classifications, that how we can classify these international organizations. Of course, they can be classified on the basis of the membership, that whether they are universal institutions having almost all the states of the world as a member of that institution. Like you can take the example of United Nations, where 194 members are there. Then WTO, then you can talk about the example of the regional institutions like African unions or European unions. Then last part of the topic 1 is India and the international organizations. Why? Because what is the role of India in making and shaping of these international organizations? What kind of say it has in international organizations? So last element of topic 1 deals with that aspect, where we are going to discuss the article of 2 prominent scholars like Professor P.S. Chimney and Professor Anand, who has done commendable job in the international law. So this is in the topic 1. When we talk about the topic 2, as I have already talked about the legal personality, the first component is legal personality, and about legal personality we have already discussed somewhat when we were talking about the public international law. When we are talking about the United Nations, that United Nations has its own legal personality. So legal personality has some kind of consequences, there's some kind of rights, some kind of privilege, some kind of powers, some kind of immunities are contemplated under the legal personality. Then we discussed a constituent instrument by which a particular organization came into existence. Then under C, we discussed the power and implied powers of these institutions, that what kind of powers and implied powers they have, particularly if the institution has a particular kind of nature. So its power is confined to that area, and sometimes it has implied powers too, the powers which are not written in clear cut in the treaty, but on account of its functions, that implied powers are available with that institutions. Then under D, what we are going to discuss is whether these international organizations are capable to create the international customary law or not. Few articles are there. There are diverse opinions among the scholars. So we will also explore these issues too under the last component D. Then there is other 4 topics are there under the topic 3, responsibility of international organizations, that we are going to discuss that what kind of responsibilities these international organizations have. Their responsibilities are clear cut. You can find out these responsibilities in making of these institutions. For example, United Nations, when you talk about the United Nations, UN Charter says that the responsibility of the United Nations is to establish the peace and security in the world. In this same way, when you are talking about the WTO, it is concerned in the trade and commerce, to govern the trade and commerce at the international level. Then we are going to discuss the topic 4, privileges and immunities. Each institution or organization, when it came into existence, it has some privileges, some immunities. What these privileges are, what kind of immunities they have, we are going to deal under the topic 4. Or if you see up to the topic 4, these are the common elements which you could find out in the almost all international institutions or organizations, because these are the basic things which constitute the international organizations. So up to topic 4, we have taken that what we can see, which are the common to the all institutions. So up to topic 4, we are going to deal with this aspect. Now, in order to have a concrete example of this, we are going to deal in the topic 5, the two major institutions of the world. One is the United Nations, another is the European Union. When you talk about the United Nations, it is one of the most important institutions of the world, and it is also universal institutions because its reach, you can feel that almost the entire states of the world are the members of the United Nations. Therefore, it is known as a universal institution. The purpose behind making of the United Nations is to establish peace and security and to bring the development or to eradicate the poverty and all those. So many, purpose and goals which has been given under the UN Charter. So we are going to study what are the structures, what are the powers, what are the functions of the United Nations as a universal institutions. And in the same way, we have the European Union. European Union, why we have taken, because European Union is a regional institution. When we are talking about the regional institutions, it simply means that it is confined to certain regions. So now it is confined to the European states. Of course, European Union is also facing some kind of problem as a Brexit is going on right now, and whether it will exit with a deal or no deal. So, but still, European Union is one of the most important regional organizations in comparison to other regional organizations. Of course, the African Union is also there, ASEAN is also there, but in comparison to all, if you will think about the European Union, it is a more integrated kind of institutions. So that's why we put the European Union in the topic 5. And then the last topic is 6. And under this topics, we are going to deal with the international legal institutions. Two important legal institutions we have taken here. That is International Court of Justice. That is an integral part of the United Nations and has been playing a very vital role right from the beginning of the International Court of Justice. But if you will see the role of the International Court of Justice, let me tell you one thing very clearly. If you compare it with any topmost body of the justice, for example, with the Supreme Court of India, you will find that the ICJ had decided only few cases right from the beginning of the International Court of Justice. And one of the reasons behind is that it doesn't have the compulsory jurisdictions. So therefore, only few hundreds cases it has decided, and among them, majority of them are opinions. And ICJ role, you could find out that recently in Kulbhushan Jadhav case, when the provisional measures were issued by the ICJ, so this court has become a very prominent in that day that almost all these papers are covering that proceedings which was going before the International Court of Justice. So what is the nature of the International Court of Justice, how it is constituted, how many judges are there, what are the functions and all those, we are going to deal under the International Court of Justice. And the last topic is International Criminal Court. Last component, in fact, of topic 6. International Criminal Court is of a recent origin, and earlier there was not a permanent body. For example, Yugoslavia Tribunal was there, then Rwanda tribunals were there, but both tribunals were constituted by the resolution of the United Nations for particular purpose. Both tribunals deal with the genocide which took place in Rwanda and Yugoslavia. So they were not of the permanent nature. But International Criminal Court is of a permanent nature, which came into existence in 2001 onward by the Rome Statute. And although still there are many countries that are not a member of the International Criminal Court, including India, and it has dealt only with a few cases. But since it is the only forum which is dealing with the criminal, so that's why we have put that component in topic 6, and that is your syllabus. Thank you very much. And if you want to clarify any point, I am here. So far it is concerned to the material of this topic, let me tell you that it is a compilation of the various articles and some part of some books have been taken therein. So it is only meant for the private circulations and those students who wanted to opt this subject, that would be made available to all of them. Thank you very much.